Welcome to Live Daf, your online Daf Yomi Shir.
Shalom Aleichem and welcome back to today's Daf Yomi Shabbos Daf Lamed Tes. We're on Lamed Ches Amud Beis towards the bottom. Perhaps we should begin again from the Mishnah, which is the introduction to our sugya. So the Mishnah here will go back to the malacha of mevashel, of cooking on Shabbos. Now, if one does bishul on Shabbos with an actual flame, a fire, that certainly is a malacha, a biblical prohibition, the malacha of bishul. What about if one uses toldois ha'ur, a derivative of the heat of the fire? It's not the actual fire itself, but the heat which was sourced from fire. For instance, if he uses a kettle which was heated on the flame but now is off the flame, so this kettle now contains the heat of the fire which is embedded in it. May one do bishul with that heat? The Mishnah will go into this. Begins the Mishnah, a noisnin beitza betzad hamecham. When we not place an egg alongside the hot kettle, even though the kettle is off the flame, bishvil shat is galgal, so that the egg gets slightly roasted. Rashi says the lashon tes galgal is because a raw egg doesn't have the ability to roll properly, only once it starts hardening. So you're not allowed to place the egg in that location where it will warm up and get somewhat roasted and will roll properly. So this is the malacha of bishul, even though he's not actually using the direct source of heat, the flame itself. He's using a derivative, something, the heat which was derived, was taken from a flame, that is, told us ha'or, a derivative of fire. That too is considered to be like fire, and this is considered to be a malacha of bishul midaraisa. Continues the Mishnah. What about using the heat from the sun? Says the Mishnah, that too is not allowed. You can't take the egg and crack it into a sudar, into a scarf, into some sort of material which got heated up through the sun. You can't take the egg and break it into the besudar, into those scarves which were heated by the sun. Although he's not using the sun directly, it is a derivative. The heat here is derived, is coming from the sun. It's toldois hachama, and it is asur. Rabbi Yossi Mater, Rabbi Yossi says, toldois hachama is mutter. Continues the Mishnah, you can't take this egg and bury it into hot sand or dust on the side of the road, which was heated by the sun. So the egg will get roasted. So that too is asur, because the sand and this dust became heated to the sun. It is told us hachama. It received its heat from the chama, and here too it's asur. Now, Rabbi Yossi seems to agree in this case that although it's merely toldois hachama, it's mutter. The Gemara will explain why these cases of choyle and avak drachim are asur even according to Rabbi Yossi. So once again, direct heat from a fire is certainly a melacha d'oraisa. Indirect heat, toldois ha'ur, if he has the heat embedded in a kettle, so that is too considered like fire, and cooking with that is prohibited mid'oraisa. What about using toldois hachama, using a derivative of the sun heat? Let's say the sun heated something up, heated an item like a piece of material, and now the heat of the sun is embedded in that material. That is toldois hachama, a derivative of the sun. According to the Tanakam, that too is considered to be bishul. According to Rabbi Yossi, it's not. This Mishnah proceeds with another example of toldois hachama, the hot sand, the hot dust, which was heated by the sun. There, all agree that one may not encase an egg in this sand to have it roast, because it's considered to be bishul. The Gemara will explain why Rabbi Yossi agrees in this case. The Mishnah concludes with this story. There was an incident with the people of Tveria who made a hot water cooking arrangement for Shabbos. So we know that in Tveria there are those chami Tveria, those springs, those hot springs, those thermal springs that the Gemara tells us they remain from the time of the Mabul. Hashem left them over because humanity benefits from it. So in Tveria they had these thermal springs, these hot water springs, and they wanted to make an arrangement that they can have hot water on Shabbos. They didn't have the systems we have today, So they figured something out which would enable them to have clean water, hot water on Shabbos. And this is what they did. They took a pipe of cold water and they ran it through. They ran it through this stream of hot water of this Chami Tveria. So they arranged it all before Shabbos, and they didn't actually do a malach of bishul on Shabbos. They worked it out that the water should run through the siloin, so through this pipe, which was embedded in the hot water. It should run through that on Shabbos, and this way the cold water will warm up, and they have hot water on Shabbos. The Chacham told them it's not acceptable. In B'Shabbos, if the water is coming through on Shabbos and it heats up on Shabbos, this water has the halachic status of water which was actually warmed up on Shabbos, and one may not use it. It is equivalent to a person warming it up, and it is asurin b'rechitza b'shtiya. One may not use it for bathing or for drinking. In B'Yom, if this water is coming through the system on Yom Tov, it's getting heated up on Yom Tov, then it has the same halachic status like water, hot water which was cooked up on Yom Tov. And if one cooks up hot water on Yom Tov, that water is asurin b'rechitza. It is unfit for bathing, umutar mishtiya. However, for drinking purposes, it is allowed. The Gemara later will expound on the meaning behind these halachas. So in conclusion, the people of Tveria, they wanted to set up a system where they will have water heating up on Shabbos. The Rabbanan told them this is not allowed. If it happened on Shabbos, may not use the water altogether. If this takes place on Yom Tov, then the only thing you can use this water for is for drinking purposes. Continues the Gemara, Iboilu, they asked the following question. Gilgal Mai. What if a person actually roasts this egg, slightly roasts it near the kettle? What is the halacha? Now we know that an egg is sensitive, it's tender, it tends to get roasted very easily, and as soon as it even roasts a little bit, it is already fit for consumption. So if he puts this egg there, and this little heat actually accomplishes that the egg became fit for consumption, becomes slightly roasted, is this considered to be a malacha d'oraisa, a malacha of bishul, even though there was a very small measure of cooking, of roasting that took place here? Gilgal mai, Rav Yosef, Gilgal chayv chatas. If one does this Gilgal, slightly roast this egg, even on the side of this kettle, this heat affects the egg to the extent that we consider it to be mavushal, and his chayv chatas. Continues the Gemara, Omar Mar, Brei de Ravina, Af Anan and Amitanin. We also learned from a Mishnah which supports this concept that there are some items that are very highly sensitive to heat, and they don't require much cooking. Even a little measure of cooking actually is considered to be mavushal, considered to be a malach of bishul, since this small amount of cooking, it prepares this food item, it renders it fit for consumption. Let's take a look at the Mishnah. The Mishnah gives us 3 examples, 3 categories. One is kol sheba b'chamen milfnei Shabbos. Rashi says we're speaking about a salted item which was actually soaked in hot water before Shabbos to make it fit for consumption, to make it edible. In that case, since it was already soaked, it's already considered to be fully cooked, says Taisvis, and as a result, he may actually soak it in hot water even on Shabbos because it's already cooked beforehand. The second halach is if an item was not actually soaked in hot water before Shabbos, and it needs to be soaked on Shabbos to make it fit for consumption, the Mishnah says that is not allowed. The only thing he can do is he can actually rinse it using hot water on Shabbos, but he may not soak it in hot water. Tosfos explains, Tosfos brings the sheet Hari, that evidently we're speaking about pouring hot water from a kli sheni, meaning not from the pot which actually cooked the water, but the vessel which contains the water which was poured over from that initial vessel, from the kli rishon over to the kli sheni. So the kli sheni water is not as hot as the kli rishon, and therefore being madiach, pouring from the kli sheni, is okay. But pouring directly from the kli rishon, from the initial pot, that certainly is asur according to the Shita Azri. So the Mishnah tells us that an item which was not soaked before Shabbos in hot water, he cannot soak it on Shabbos, but really he can rinse it. Chutz, this applies to everything except chutz min hamaliach yashan, an old salted fish. V'kuliyas hasponin, this Spanish mackerel, this salty Spanish mackerel. So any one of these two items, at this point, since they're salted to the extent that they don't need to be cooked anymore, the salting process substitutes for the cooking process. So either the maliach yashan, this old fish, some say yashan means from last year. So Rashi says shel shana she'avar, from last year. So these items are at this point, they're very tender, and even rinsing them renders them fit for use. Is considered to be fixing them and completing their cooking process. Shadochasan zu igmar malachton. Merely rinsing them is considered to be igmar malacha. It's considered to be bishul. So we see from this Mishnah that some items that are tender and sensitive and delicate, in that case, even merely doing a rinse is considered to be bishul. Shema mina, indeed, we hear this concept very clearly, and therefore, in our case as well with the egg, merely placing it near the meicham, near this kettle, already affects it to the extent that the egg is considered to be roasted, and it is considered to be a malacha of bishul. And if he did it on Shabbos, he's chayav chatas. Continues the Gemara, v'lo yafkihenu b'sudara, and the Mishnah told us that you cannot take this egg, crack it into a piece of material which received its heat from the sun. That is considered to be toldos hachama. Now, Rav Yosi disagrees. He says it's mutter in this case because he's not using the an actual fire. Says the Gemara, okay, based on this, how are we going to understand the Mishnah? V'hadasnan, how are we going to understand the following Mishnah? One may place a container with food in an empty pit, so that the food will remain cool and it will avoid the spoilage. So that's allowed. You can take a container with clean water and place it, embed it into stale water, cool stale water, that the clean water cools off. And finally, you may place a container with cold water in the sun, expose it to the sun rays, so that it warms up on account of the sun. Says the Gemara, whose opinion is this Mishnah following? Is this Mishnah based on Rav Yosi's opinion, not Rabbanan? Because apparently this Mishnah allows one to use the heat of sun for cooking. This concurs with Shittas Rav Yosi, who tells us that one may crack an egg into a suda which was heated by the sun. Says the Gemara, Omar of Nachman, we must make several distinctions here. Bechama, when one is cooking by exposure, direct exposure to sunlight, to the heat of the sun, all agree that's not considered to be bishul. That is mutar, Rashi says, because the ein derech bishul b'kach, that is not the regular method of cooking. And a malach on Shabbos must be something which is done regularly, in an ordinary fashion, an ordinary manner. Cooking using the sun rays, that's not considered to be derech bishul, that is not a malacha. So all agree to that, even the Rabbanon. Again, b'chama, kuliyam olei pligi d'shari. B'toldo isor, kuliyam olei pligi d'aser. Now, if one cooks with a flame, that certainly is bishul. What about toldo isor, a derivative of a fire? Heat which was derived from the flame. For instance, the meicha mentioned now Mishnah, the kettle which was heated on the flame, but now is removed from the flame. It's off the flame, but it contains the heat of the fire within it. That is toldoi saur. All agree that is considered to be in the status of fire, and a bishul with this heat is a full-fledged malach of bishul. Bil toldo saur, says the Gemara, kulam pligi de aser. All agree that also. Ki pligi, when then is there a dispute between the Rabbanan and Rav Yosi? Strictly in one case. One is cooking, when one is doing bishul, using heat derived from the sun. For instance, these pieces of material, these sudar, these scars that we heated through the sun. Mar Savar, Gazrinan, told us Achama, or to told us Ar. The Rabbanan hold that although min HaTorah, it's not bishul. However, when the Rabbanan, they enacted a gzeira decree. There's a rabbinic decree here not to use the told us Achama. perhaps there's a possibility that one will go ahead on account of this, go ahead and also use Toldoy Sa'ur, the heat derived from fire. Therefore, lest one make that confusion, that mistake, the Rabbanan prohibited using even Toldoy Sa'ur. They didn't apply this Gzera to direct heat from the sunlight, from the sun, because nobody's going to confuse a sun hanging up in the sky with a flame. So there's no reason to make a Gzera there. But a derivative, a Toilada, perhaps there's a reason for confusion. There's a basis, a ground for a mistake, because one may not differentiate between the heat embedded in a sudar coming from the sun, which is mutter, and between that and the heat embedded in the sudar, which was coming from a flame, which is Toldos Sa'ur, which is Aser. So therefore Chacham applied a Gzera, and even Toldos Sa'chama is Aser. Umar, so Rav Yossi, however, holds, no, there was never such a Gzera, and therefore, just as one can cook using the direct heat from the sun by exposure to the sun rays, so to Toldos Hachama is also acceptable. One may indeed crack the egg into the sudar, which was heated by the sun, although it is Toldos Hachama, it is mutter. Okay, continues the Gemara. The Mishnah mentioned the case of loyat v'nena b'choil, you may not take the egg and embed it and bury it into hot sand or hot dust, which was heated up by the sun. And here we have no machlekes. The Mishnah doesn't cite any opposing view. Apparently Rav Yossi agrees that cooking the egg in this manner is asur, even though this is just another example of heat which was derived from the sun, Toldos Hachama. So why does Rav Yossi agree that this is asur? V'lif like nami Rav Yossi beha, asked the Gemara. Rav Yossi should indeed dispute this as well. Says the Gemara, why is this different? We have two answers. Number one, Rabba Amar, this is unique. Burying covering the egg in sand carries with it another concern. Gzeira, Shemayat Mirem. This is a concern that a person will perhaps confuse this hot sand which was heated by the sun. Just as this is permitted, he perhaps will go ahead and use remets, which are the ashes which contain the fire, the coals. And then if he does that, if he buries the egg in the remets, he's doing a malacha d'oraisa. That certainly is bishul, but not Torah, because he's using fire. Therefore, the Chachamim prohibited burying, encasing the egg in the sand on account of this concern. So even Rav Yossi agrees that this case is unique and it's asur. Number two, says the Gemara, Rav Yossi Amar, it's asur on account of a different reason. Or concerned that perhaps if he's going to bury the egg in sand, he might go ahead and dig a bit of a hole there in the earth in order to make place for his egg. And Rashi says that is the malacha of chayr, he's being chayfer, he's digging in the ground, that is a malacha. So here there's a concern for it developing into a malacha d'oraisa. And Rav Yossi agrees that this case will be us. Might be now, it says, what is the halachic difference, ramification between these two approaches, between Rabbah and Rav Yossi? But now there's a difference. What if he buries the egg, he covers it with loose sand? In this case, according to Rabbah, it's still asur, because this time he's using sand, the next time he might use afer, he might use the remets, the ashes which contain coals. According to Rav Yosef, in this case it's mutter, because loose sand does not involve any digging. There's no concern that he's going to go ahead and dig and do a malacha d'oraisa. Continues the Gemara, Meisiv of a kasha from a brayso. Rishim Gamaliel Omer, Megalgun beitza al gabi gag resech. One may slightly roast his egg on top of a hot roof, which got cooked up, baked up by the sun. So that's okay. Ve'megalgun beitza al gabi sidrei tzeach. But he may not go ahead and roast his egg using this hot lime which was heated up by fire. So the brayso allows the gag which was heated up by the sun, but not the lime which is heated by a ordinary fire. So the gag is Toldos Hachama. The sidrei seich is Toldos Sa'ur. Okay, says the Gemara, let's analyze this brayso based on the aforementioned discussion. So it's understandable, according to the Shita, which said, understand that according to Rabbah, that told us that the the concern according to Rav Yossi when placing the egg in the sand is perhaps next time, or somebody else will go ahead and confuse that with ashes and go ahead and put the egg in ashes and do a malacha d'oraisa. Therefore, it's also even according to Rav Yossi. However, that concern doesn't apply to the roof mentioned in this brisa. Therefore, according to Rav Yossi, this is mutter. So the Man Da'amar, the author of this brisa, Rav Shimon Gamliel, is following the shita of Rav Yossi, is concurring with the same opinion as Rav Yossi, and therefore placing it on the rooftop is okay. Says the Gemara, Bishleim Laman Da'amar, once again, Bishleim Laman Da'amar Gzeira Shemayatum V'Remetz. That even according to Rav Yossi's opinion, there's a concern about placing an egg in sand, Gzeira, because perhaps that might lead to somebody placing the egg in Remetz. In this case, like a lemigzar. Now, a case of a rooftop, there's no concern. He's not embedding it in anything. He's not covering it in anything. He's not burying. He's not encasing the egg in anything. He's merely cooking it on the surface of the rooftop. There's no concern of Shamayaptim Remetz. However, according to Rav Yossi's approach, who explains that Rav Yossi prohibits the egg in the sand because there's a concern they might go ahead and dig some of the earth. Says the Gemara, on the case of the rooftop ligzar, here too perhaps this gzera will apply. There's a concern they might go ahead and dig some of the earth up there to place his egg in there. Says the Gemara, stam gag, an ordinary roof, a typical roof, less be'afra, doesn't have any earth on it. Therefore, there's indeed no concern for that as well. Perhaps let's take stock of where we're holding up until this point with regards to Melechas Bishul. So Melechas Bishul is one of the Lamates Melachos, and the Gemara told us that even sometimes even a minimal amount of Bishul constitutes Melech of Bishul and incurs. He is liable for a Chatas. What is an example of that? We have actually a couple. Gilgul Beitza, slightly roasting an egg, rinsing the Meliach Yoshan or the Kulius Hispanin, which are tender and delicate, even rinsing them with hot water, is considered to be a bishul because he's rendering them fit for consumption, and he is doing a bishul, even with a small amount of cooking. Now, what type of heat source is involved in the Melech of Bishul? So if it's direct fire or Eish, certainly that's a Melech d'oraisa. What about Toldos or heat which was derived from fire? For instance, this kettle, this meicham, where the heat of a fire was embedded within it, that too is considered to be fire with regards to Melacha Bishul d'oraisa. What about cooking by exposure to sun rays? That is mutter. Rashi tells us that is not the derech bishul. What about using toldes hachama, heat which was derived from the sun? According to Rav Yossi, it's mutter. According to Rabbanan, it's asur. There's a gzera that if he uses this, he might use the toldes hur as well, which is a melacha d'oraisa. What about putting the egg inside the hot sand which was heated by the sun? All agree that it's asur. And why is that? There's a gzera d'Rabbanan, because perhaps a different time you might go ahead and use remetz, those ashes, those coals. According to Rav Yossi, the concern is they might go ahead and dig a ditch, might dig a hole for the egg, and that is a melacha d'oraisa. Continues the Gemara. Tashma, the Mishnah told us, related the incident of Maaseh she'asu anshe Tveria. So they organized this whole system. They placed the pipe with the hot water. They ran it through the hot water, and the Mishnah concludes that it wasn't proper. The Rabbanan told them they may not use this water. Now, the Mishnah doesn't seem to relate this to the machlekes of Rabbanan and Rav Yossi. Apparently, all agree that in this case it's asur. So more will analyze why. Bishleim, it's understandable. So according to Rabbah, who told us the reason why the egg in the sand is asur, on a gzera, on a concern that he might use remetz. So, says the Gemara, this concern will indeed apply to the chamet Tveria as well. Hainu the dami latmana. In this case as well, he's encasing the cold water within the hot. Therefore, it's also even according to Rav Yossi, on account of a gzera shemayatum v'remetz. However, according to Rav Yosef, it told us the reason why the egg can't be in the sand, because he might dig the ditch. In this case of the water, there's no ditches, there's no digging. Michael Meimar, why is it asur? So according to Rav Yosef's pshat, that the reason is because he might dig the ditch. And only in that case, according to Rav Yosi, is there an Isser. But in this case of the water, there's no concern of digging ditches, of a malacha of cherish, or baina, whatever the malacha is. So there's no concern. So why, according to Rav Yosi, in this case, is the cold water Asr? Since he's not heating up the cold water using fire, or even heat which was sourced from fire, which was derived from fire. He's using merely Chamit Tveria. And since the Chamit Tveria was not sourced in a flame and in a fire, why, according to Rav Yosi, is this Asr? Says the Rami Savris, Maaseh Tveria Sefer Koi. Do you think that this story, this incident that the Mishnah brings, is related to the halacha of the egg in the sand, and the Mishnah is coming to support that halacha by saying, well, just as we know that placing the egg in the sand is usher according to all, according to Rabbanan, according to Rav Yosi, for the reasons mentioned earlier, the Mishnah is supporting that with a story. We find a similar case regarding Anshe Tveria that was prohibited on account of the same concerns. No, says the Gemara, certainly not. This story has no relation to the halacha of the egg in the sand, because the reason provided there certainly doesn't apply here, according to Rav Yosef. The reason of the digging the hole doesn't apply by water. Again, says the Gemara, Misavris, Maaseh Tveria Sefer Koi. Do you maintain that this story is connected, is mentioned in relation to the halacha of the Sefer, the latter part of the Mishnah, with the egg and the sand? Says, well, no, it's totally unrelated to that. Areisha Koi. The Mishnah is bringing this story as support, as a raya, to the halacha mentioned earlier in the Mishnah, which is lo yafkenu b'sudaron. One may not take the egg and crack it into those scars, into those materials which are heated by the sun, since it is todois ha-chama, since the heat in this material was derived from the sun. So this is the sheet of the Tanakama. Rav Yosi Mata. Rav Yosi says it's mutter, because todois ha-chama, according to Rav Yosi, is mutter. On that, in relation to that halacha, come the Rabbanan and say to Rav Yosi, we will bring you a proof that heating through heat derived from the sun, todas hachama, indeed is aser, as reflected in the story of the Anshe Tveria. This is what the Rabbanan are telling Rav Yosi. Hamas the Anshe Tveria, they told us hachama who the story with Tveria was told us hachama. The fire, the heat, the heat in the spring waters of Tveria, the Gemara maintains that it comes somehow from the sun. So it's certainly not coming from a real flame, a real fire. Nevertheless, the Chacham prohibited that water. They considered that water to be mavushal. Says the Gemara, even though it's told us chamahu, v'as rabbanon. So you see, the Rabbanon applied an isser even with water cooked through heat, which was derived from chama, which never came from a real flame, a real legitimate fire. It came from the sun. So the Gemara either means it came from the sun, or the Gemara means to say that in any case it didn't come from a flame, from fire. Nevertheless, we see that it's aser. So apparently even Toldas Hacham is aser, as the Gemara told us earlier, because it's a gzera. If he's going to use Toldas Hacham, he might use Toldas Ha'ur, he might use something which has heat which came from a fire, which according to all is aser. So in any case, the Rabbanan have a raya to their shita from the Chamit Tveria. Amar Lahu, so Rav Yosi responds to them, no. Hahu told us urhu. The thermal springs of Tveria, the hot water, is actually deriving its heat from a fire. Which fire? The Chalfia Pischa de Gehenim. Because they pass by the opening of Gehenim. So even though it's not really a man-made fire, but it's considered to be a fire nevertheless. And this heat embedded in the Chamit Tveria is derived not from the sun, rather from a real fire. And certainly, Toldos Ha'ur is Asr according to all Shittas. So at this point in the Gemara, what is the reason for the Isser regarding Chamit Tveria? The Gemara initially figured that it's because of Gzeira. And the Gemara told us that there's Gzeira here because of Shema Yaptim Beremetz. Just as he can't place the egg in the sand, here too he cannot place the cold water in the hot water. Perhaps next time he's going to use coals. The Gemara said, but that won't work according to Rabbi Yosef, who tells us that the reason for the egg in the sand is because of the concern of digging a ditch, which certainly is not applicable to the water. The Gemara proceeded and told us, well, the reason for the Issa of Chametz Tveria is because it is, according to the Rabbanon, it is Toldos Hachama, and therefore he derived from the sun is Asur for Bishul, Midrabanan. According to Rav Yosi, this is a Bishul D'Oraisa, because this is Toldos Ha'ur. The heat embedded in the Chametz Tveria comes from a fire, the fire of Gehenna. Cooking with this is a Malacha D'Oraisa. Continues the Gemara, we have a third approach, a third explanation for the Isser of Chametz Tveria. Omar Rav Chisda, based on this story of Anshe Tveria, ve'asur Rabbanan, that the Rabbanan applied an Isser, we learn the following halacha. Batla Tmana b'davar meisav hevel. We learn that one may not be matman, insulate a food item, using materials that are meisav hevel, that add heat. He can't even do it, even if he chooses to wrap the food with this material, even on Erev Shabbos, since this material is meisav hevel. What is the reason for that? We learned the Gemara earlier that told us there's a concern that if he uses a davar hameisav hevel, materials which add heat, perhaps he's going to use remets, these ashes which contain coals. What's wrong with that? If he's doing it on Erev Shabbos, what's wrong? Because then on Shabbos he might approach his pot and stir those coals, which is a malacha d'oraisa. So according to Rav Chisda's approach, this is the basis, this is the reasoning for the prohibition that the Rabbanan applied to the water of Chametz Tveria, because the water which was going through the Chametz Tveria was considered to be Hatmana. It was embedded in there. And the Chametz Tveria was a davar meisav hevel. It was something which generates heat. Therefore, this is a malacha, an issa d'Rabbanan. Hatmana davar meisav hevel is asur, and that is the reason for the issa. So once again, we have a third approach. The first approach was that it's an issa d'Rabbanan because of Shema Yatim Remetz. The second approach was that the Chametz Tveria asur because, well, according to the Shittas Rabbanan, it's an Issa D'Rabbanan because the Chametz Tveria are heated up by the sun. It's told us Chama. According to Rav Yosi, it is a Malacha D'Oraisa because the Chametz Tveria passes by Gehenna, it gets heated by the fire. It's told us Ur. Therefore, the Chachamim said the water which was embedded in the Chametz Tveria, which was heated by the Toldos Ur, is Asur Mid'Oraisa. Finally, Rav Chisda tells us the third approach. The Isser of the water which was embedded in the Chametz Tveria is Asur Midrabanan, because it is Hatmana B'davar HaMeisav Hevel. Concludes the Gemara, Amar Ula, Halacha Anshe Tveria. Indeed, the Halacha follows the opinion of Anshe Tveria. Their system was halachically valid. Only of Nachman, no, Kvar Tavrinu Anshe Tveria, the people of Tveria already broke up L'Silunayu, their pipes. So indeed, they retracted and they conceded to the words of the Rabbanan, and we're not meant to do this any longer. It's usher to create a system of Anshe Tveria. Continues the Gemara, Masa She'asa Anshe Tveria. So back again to the story of Anshe Tveria. So they created the system, and the Rabbanan told them, you need to know something. If this water got cooked on Shabbos, you may not use this water, not for rechitza, for bathing, nor for drinking. If this water was cooked on Yom Tov, so this water got heated up on Yom Tov through your system, you may use it for drinking purposes, but not for bathing. Says the Gemara, let's analyze the words of the Mishnah. My rechitza, when the Mishnah uses the word rechitza, what is it referring to? Ilay rechitzas kol gufay, bathing one's entire body. So one may not use this water for bathing since it was cooked on Shabbos. Says the Gemara, Elo chamen shuchma b'Shabbos udasur. So do you maintain that only this chamen, this water which was heated on actually on Shabbos, it is asur for rechitza? But we imply from here that chamen shuchma be'erev Shabbos mutarin. It's only because it got cooked on Shabbos. But if it was heated on Erev Shabbos, then it's okay for rechitza. When we use this water to bathe with it on Shabbos itself, but haven't we learned that one may not do so? Chametz shuchma be'erev Shabbos, water, even if it was heated on Erev Shabbos, it was huchma mei Erev Shabbos le'machar, on Shabbos itself. What may he do with that water? Roiches ben panav yodav raglav. He may use it to rinse, to wash his face, his hands, and his feet. Avaloi kol gufay. He cannot use it to bathe with it his entire body. So we see here that rechitza with hot water is prohibited on Shabbos. We'll learn it later on the Gemara on the Daf Mem. The Rabbanan made a gzeras merchatzois. There's a rabbinic decree, a bathhouse decree. The Chacham prohibited one from bathing on Shabbos with hot water, even if the water was already cooked, was heated up on Erev Shabbos, because those attendants of the bathhouse, those balonim, would go ahead and actually heat up the water on Shabbos itself. So Chachamim decreed that one may not bathe himself with hot water on Shabbos. So that's the basis for the brisa, that even if the water was already cooked on Erev Shabbos, he may not take a proper bath. He can only use it for panav, yadav, v'raglov. That's okay. That's not included in the gzeira of merchatzois. So how could you say that the reason why he cannot bathe with this hot water of the chametz because it was cooked on Shabbos, even regardless of that fact, even if it was cooked on Erev Shabbos, it's also to use it for bathing? It says in where Elo, you must say panav, yadav, v'raglov. That the term rechitza, discussed in our Mishnah, is referring to a limited form of bathing, washing one's face, hands, and feet. And that indeed is mutter on Shabbos, provided the water was cooked on Erev Shabbos. But if it got heated up on Shabbos itself, the Mishnah tells us it may not be used even for that. Okay, so now we understand the first halacha with regards to Shabbos. If it was cooked on Shabbos, prohibited. If it was cooked on Erev Shabbos, I can use it on Shabbos for a partial washing. If so, says the Gemara Amos Sefer, let's drop down to the next halacha. What about if it happened on Yom Tov? The Rabbanan told him, the Chacham told him, be Yom Tov, if this water passed through the chametz and was heated up on Yom Tov itself, then it has the halacha, has a status. It's like water which was heated up on Yom Tov. And what is the halacha of asur and berachitza? One may not use this water for bathing. And bathing here is referring to not bathing to your entire body. We're speaking about bathing panav, yadav, v'raglov. Okay, so it was cooked on Yom Tov, you can't use it for that. However, for drinking purposes, it's allowed. If so, says the Gemara, this will pose a difficulty. Lema, are you going to suggest, perhaps, Tanan stomach beishamai? So this view, stated anonymously in our Mishnah, that water which was cooked on Yom Tov cannot be used to wash oneself on Yom Tov, even for panav, yadav, v'raglov. This apparently is following the Shita Beis Shammai, as will be presented in the following Mishnah. This is not as we learned. Beis Shammai, Lo yochim adam chamen l'raglav. One may not heat up water on Yom Tov in order to use it to wash his feet. Elim kain ruin l'shti, unless this water is suitable for drinking. So one may heat up water on Yom Tov for drinking purposes. Explains Tosfos, if his initial intention is to cook the water for drinking, then he may actually add some more water in there for washing as well. But the initial intent needs to be for drinking. Rabbi Sil Matir. Sil say yes, he's allowed to cook up water on Yom Tov in order to use it to wash himself, to wash his face, his hands, and his feet. Says the Gemara, apparently our Mishnah, which tells us that water which was cooked, which was heated up actually on Yom Tov itself, cannot be used even to wash one's face, hands, and feet. Apparently this Mishnah is following the opinion of Beis Shammai and not Beis Hillel, and that cannot be so. It's difficult to establish our Mishnah according to Beis Shammai. So let's find a different solution, a different interpretation for our Mishnah. Perhaps we should just stop for a moment and take stock regarding the various halachas of washing oneself with hot water. So it depends if the water was heated up before Shabbos. One may take that water and wash his face, hands, and feet on Shabbos. The same thing on Yom Tov. What about if the water was heated up actually on Shabbos itself? Then it is asur, like the chametz. The Rabbanan said he cannot use it on Shabbos. What about the water which was cooked up on Yom Tov for the sake of using it for rechitza? According to Beis Shammai, it's asur. According to Beis Hillel, it is mutter. He could use it to wash his hands, face, and feet. Panav, yadav, v'raglov. So getting back to our Gemara, we're trying to analyze the word in the Mishnah, the word called rechitza. My rechitza, what exactly is this rechitza referring to? So we had two options so far, none of them worked. The first option was, rechitza is referring to bathing. The Gemara says that doesn't work, because the Mishnah tells us the reason why they can't bathe with this hot water, because it was cooked on Shabbos. Apparently, if it would have been heated up on Erev Shabbos, one may use it for rechitza on Shabbos. We know that's not so. The Gemara proceeded and said, well, we're not speaking about the full bathing process, the rechitza's kol haguf. We're speaking about a limited rechitza of just panav yad v'raglav. And therefore, if the water was heated on Erev Shabbos, certainly can use it on Shabbos to wash panav yad v'raglav. But the Gemara said that can't either work, because why? If the water was cooked on Yontif, can it not be used for this purpose? That's only Beis Shammai who says that it's also according to Beis Hillel, even water which is cooked on Yontif can be used for panav yad v'raglav. So apparently, the meaning of rechitza must be explained differently. Says the Gemara, indeed, Omar of Ikabar Chanina, Lishtatef ben kol gufei askinan. The term rechitza is referring to a different concept. Rinsing, using the hot water to rinse with it one's entire body. It's not rechitza, it's not bathing, it's merely a rinse, like a shower. So in this case, the halachas are different. It's not exactly like a bath. It's not the halachas of the gzeres merchatzois, not necessarily apply to this case as well, because merchatzois is referring to bathing oneself in the hot water. This is rinsing oneself with the hot water. In this case, it's different. Says the Gemara b'Aitanahu, our Mishnah, which says that hot water may be used to rinse oneself on Shabbos. Even the hot water, even since the hot water was cooked on Erev Shabbos, he can rinse his entire body with it on Shabbos. The Mishnah is following the following opinion, which is actually Shittas Reb Shimon, which will tell us that hot water, if it was cooked on Erev Shabbos, one may take that water and rinse one's entire body with it on Shabbos. And therefore the Mishnah tells us that the Chametz Tveria, that was prohibited because that water was cooked on Shabbos itself. But we imply from there that water which was cooked on Erev Shabbos is mutter. Why? Because he's merely rinsing himself, and that is mutter even l'shtatev, but in kol gufay, in accordance with Shittas Reb Shimon mentioned in the following brisa. Now, with regards to Yom Tov as well, that if the water would have been heated on Erev Yom Tov, one may rinse oneself on Yom Tov. Hishtatev kol gufay is aser. But since it was cooked on Yom Tov itself, in that case, he may only use it for panav yad v'raglav. He may not use it to rinse one's entire body. In accordance with Beis Hillel, who tell us that hot water on Yom Tov may be used. The water on Yom Tov may be cooked up for the purpose of panav yad v'raglav. So therefore, certainly the entire guf, the shtifas kol guf, with water that was cooked on Yom Tov is not allowed, and that is a pshat in our Mishnah. Says the Gemara, b'Haitana, we're following the following shita, the Sanya, the Tana, which is based in which is included in the following brisa. One may not rinse his entire body, whether he's using hot or cold water. Even cold water is not allowed. Divrei Meir. Why is that? We're speaking even regarding hot water which was heated up yesterday on Erev Shabbos. One may not do shtifa on Shabbos, regardless of whether it's hot or cold water. Why? Because it appears as though he's doing a rechitza, and the practice was to actually rinse oneself after the rechitza, after the bath, with cold water. So this is part of the process of rechitza. We're concerned that one may go ahead and actually cook up the water on Shabbos. Reb Shimon says it's allowed. Shtifa is unlike bathing. It's not like rechitza. There's no issa, there's no gzeira in this case. So hot water, cold water, regardless, it's mutter to be used for shtifa, to rinse oneself's body on Shabbos. Rabbi Yehuda says it depends. Becham and aser b'tzoyin mutter. If he uses hot water for shtifa, it's aser, because that's reminiscent of rechitza. That's reminiscent of a bath. And here there's a concern that one may go ahead and somebody might go see that and say, well, he cooked the water on Shabbos. One may indeed cook water on Shabbos for the sake of taking a bath. So even shtifa is aser if he's using hot water. B'tzoyin and mutter, however, Rabbi Yehuda doesn't extend this iser to cold water. He says cold water carries no concerns, no gzeros. So indeed, we have Reb Shimon who tells us that water which was heated before Shabbos can be used on Shabbos to rinse oneself. Shtifas kol haguf is mutar. Indeed, our Mishnah follows Reb Shimon's shita. So once again, we have three shitas here. We have Reb Meir, we have Reb Shimon, Reb Yehuda with regards to shtifas kol gufay, rinsing one's entire body. Reb Meir says it's aser, whether it's chaman or tzayin. Reb Shimon says it's mutar. And our Mishnah follows Reb Shimon. We have Reb Yehuda who takes a middle road here. He mediates. He says, Chamin is Asr, Tzayin is Mutter. Now once again, our Mishnah apparently is following Reb Shimon, because once again our Mishnah tells us that the Rabbanan prohibited them to use the Chamet Tveria since it was cooked, it was heated on Shabbos, on Yom Tiv. We apply from there that if it would have been heated beforehand, it may be used, and what may be used for? For Shtifas Kol Haguf. That is not a Rechitza. That doesn't have the Gzeras Merchatzois, this prohibitionist decree, with Rabbanan prohibited one taking a bath with hot water on Shabbos. Shtifa is merely rinsing oneself, and that is permitted whether he's using hot or cold water. Continues the Gemara on the same topic. Omar Rav Chisda, Machlokes. This discussion, this dispute regarding Shtifa B'tzoinen between Rav Yehuda, Rav Meir, Rav Shimon is only B'kli, with water contained in a Kli. In that case, says Rashi, perhaps one will see that he's using hot water from a Kli. Oh, he cooked it up today. One is allowed to cook water on Shabbos. One is allowed to mix hot and cold water together. And that is a Malach of Bishul. But if he's using in-ground water, the Rakol Muta, everybody agrees that there's no concern there, because Rashi says the Batlu Mitar is Chamin. Farshim explained that since groundwater originated sometimes from spring water, from hot springs, so there's no concern that if a person sees him using that water, he'll say, well, it was cooked on Shabbos. There's another pshat that the hot water contained in the ground maintains its heat, so he'll say, well, it was cooked yesterday. There's no concern that will lead to somebody going ahead and doing Malacha Bishul on Shabbos. Says Mar, how can you maintain that in-ground water is mutter? For Ma'aseh Anshe Tveria, the story with regard to Anshe Tveria, what type of water was it? The Bekarka was in-ground water, but Asr Rabbanan, the Rabbanan prohibited that water. So you see, even in-ground water is Asr. Now Tosfos asks the obvious kasha. The case of the Anshe Tveria was because the water was cooked on Shabbos itself. Therefore it's Asr. How can we connect that halacha to this halacha here, which was speaking about water which was cooked yesterday? So Tosfos discusses it and provides an answer. In any case, the Gemara says, so apparently this pshat doesn't hold. Eli Itmar, if this halacha was said, if Rav Chisda's distinction between Kli and Karka was said, it was said in this manner. Hachi Itmar, this is how it was said. Machlokes bekarka. This discussion was regarding in-ground water. Ava bekli, but water contained in a Kli Dviyah Kol Asr, everybody agrees it's Asr, because yes, water in a Kli appears as though it was cooked on Shabbos. Water from a Kli, even Tzayin, according to Rav Meir, is reminiscent of the process used in the merchatz, where they would pour water on themselves. So, in this case, the Rabbanan Aser, the Rabbanan applied a prohibition. As we learned in this brayso, we have three shitas of how to apply this halacha. But in any case, water in a Kli is more stringent than water in Karka. Okay, continues the Gemara. So we have three shitas regarding rinsing oneself. Shtifas kol haguf, using water, hot water which was cooked yesterday, or even cold water. Omar Rabba Bar Bachana Rav Yechanan. Halacha, the following halacha is Kedivra Rabbi Yehuda. It's like Rabbi Yehuda. Why? We'll soon learn why. Omar Rav Yosef, Beferish Melach. He asked Rabba Bar Bachana, did you hear this ruling clearly, explicitly stated by Rav Yechanan that the halacha follows Rabbi Yehuda's shita, which says that shtifa is mutar using tzayin, but not chamin? Was this implied? Did you infer it from something else? Did you infer it from another statement of Rabbi Yechanan that the halacha here will follow Rabbi Yehuda's opinion? It says, well, my klala, what do you mean by implying from something else? Whenever we have a machlekes, we have two opposing views. We have a third view which mediates between the two. He makes a pshara. He takes a middle route. Halacha k'divra machriya. The halacha follows the mediator, except chutz from one case of a kulim atlonis. This was the case we learned earlier in the Masechta and Daf Chavtes. This was a Mishnah in Kalim regarding a piece of material which was designated by its owner for insignificant uses. We have three shitas. Reb Lezer is macher, Reb Shua is maker, Reb Kiva takes a middle route. So Afal Bisha, Reb Lezer machmer, Reb Shua makel, Reb Kiva machriya. Reb Kiva seems to be mediating. In that case, in halacha kedivra machriya, the halacha does not follow Reb Kiva even though he's mediating. Why? For two reasons. Chada, one reason is the Reb Kiva Talmudu. He was a student of Reb Lezer and Reb Shua, and therefore his view doesn't override his teacher's view. But another reason why we can't follow Reb Kiva, we know that Reb Kiva retracted and he acquiesced to the opinion of Rabbi Shua. He agreed with him. So there's no shita of Reb Kiva remaining. So indeed that case is different. We don't follow Reb Kiva's view. So was this the formula that you're following? This was This was Rav Yosef asking Rabbi Chana. You stated in the name of Rav Yochanan that we follow the sheet of Rav Yehuda, who's a mediator, who tells us, well, we're not going to be machmer like Rav Meir and say that shtifa b'chamen and b'tzoinin is aser. We're not going to be making like Rav Shimon, who is very lenient, who says chamen and tzoinin are both mutter. We're going to adopt a middle route here. We're going to say that chamen is aser like Rav Meir and tzoinin is mutter like Rav Yosi. He's a machriya. He's mediating, because with regard to chamen, it ends up being him and Rav Meir versus Rav Shimon. With regard to tzoinin, it ends up being Rav Yehuda and Rav Shimon versus Rav Meir. So we follow the shittas Machriya. Rashi says Machriya means he tips the scale, because it ends up being 2 against 1. So Rav Yosef asked Rabbi Chana, was this the formula using? Did you hear from Rabbi Yochanan specifically that the halacha follows Rabbi Yehuda, or you're merely applying this rule that halacha divrei Machriya? Says Rabbi, so if he inferred it from this formula, what's wrong? It seems to be a pretty good formula to apply. Can you draw a distinction between this case now, Brisa, and the formula that Rav Yochanan told us to adopt? Says more, yes. Dilma, perhaps, Hanamili, this formula, this rule of thumb that we're meant to follow the Machriya, Hanamili b'masnis, and this only applies to a halacha mentioned in the Mishnah. Other with Brisa loy, but halacha is mentioned in Brisa, we don't apply this rule. And we can't apply it to the case of Shtifa, which is a Brisa. Says the Gemara, Rabbi Chana responded to Rabbi Yosef, yes, Amalei, I know befeirish shmieli. I explicitly heard from Rabbi Yochanan that we followed the Shita of Rabbi Yehuda. It wasn't something which I inferred from this formula that Rabbi Yochanan provided, but rather I heard explicitly went to follow Shitas Rabbi Yehuda. So once again, with regard to rinsing one's body with hot water, shtifas kol gufay, the Gemara concluded this is only regarding a problem regarding mayim. Did this machlokes is only pertaining to mayim bekarka, mayim in ground. And we have 3 shitas. Rameya says chamen and tzoyin are both aser. Reb Shimon says both are mutter. Rabbi Yehuda says chamen is aser, tzoyin is mutter. And Rabbi Chana says yes, the halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda. Let's take a quick chazara on today's blot. We began discussing melechas bishul. We have various scenarios of bishul regarding a minimum amount of bishul which is required to slightly roast an egg, or to complete the cooking process of the completed process of this salty fish. This is considered to be a melechas bishul midaraisa, even though it's a very small measure of bishul. Since it completes it renders it fit for consumption, it's considered to be mavushal. If one cooks using an eish, that is a melacha deraisa. What about toldos or heat which was derived from a fire? That too is a melacha deraisa. What about heating through exposure to sun rays? That's mutter. That's not derech bishul. What about using heat which was derived from the sun? According to Rav Yossi, it's mutter. According to Rabban, it's aser on account of exera, because it might lead to confusion. There's a possibility that one might get confused and allow using heat which is derived from a flame, which is aser, which is considered to be melacha deraisa. What about placing an egg in hot sand, which was cooked by the sun, which was baked by the sun? That too is aser on all accounts. Even Rav Yossi agrees this is aser. The Gemara gives us 2 unique reasons. One is on account of a concern that he might do it beremetz. He might shovel the remetz on top of the egg, and that is a melacha deraisa. Or because he might go ahead and dig a hole for the egg, which is a melacha. So this concludes the various scenarios of melechas bishul, and the Gemara proceeded discussing the story of the chamitveria, where they ran the cold water through the chamitveria. The Rabbanan told them, you may not do so. The Gemara provided 3 approaches to this halacha. Initially, the Gemara says it's isam Rabbanan because of exera shemiyaftim beremetz. This is equivalent. This is equated to the halacha of the egg in the sand. Says the Gemara, okay, if that's the reason, fine. But what about the other reason? According to Rav Yosef, the concern is that he might dig a hole. That doesn't apply to water. So why is water aser? Says the Gemara, we have another approach. The reason is as follows. According to the Shitas Rabbanan, the chamitveria, although they're not todas ha'ur, the heat doesn't come from fire. It's merely todas ha'cham. It's aser. As Rabbanan hold that even heat which was derived from fire is aser. According to Rav Yossi, it's aser midaraisa, because he maintains that the chamitveria pass by Gehenna, they get heated up by the fire, and the heat in the chamitveria was derived from a fire. Cooking with that is an issa daraisa. Rav Chizda provides another approach. He says, certainly it's only Isam Darbanan, because he was matman b'davar ma'asav hevel. He insulated the food item using materials which increase heat, and that is asur midrabanan, even if it's done from Erev Shabbos. The Gemara proceeded with the halacha of washing oneself, and the Gemara told us that b'rechitza b'chamen, bathing with hot water that was huchma b'odyayim from yesterday, on Shabbos one may only use that for a partial bath for panav yad raglav. On Yom Tov as well. What about if the water was cooked today on Shabbos? One may not use that water. What about on Yom Tov? According to Beis Shammai, one may not heat up water on Yom Tov for the sake of washing. According to Beis Hillel, he may use it. He may cook it for the sake of panav yad raglav. What about rinsing oneself? Shtifas kol gufay. With mayim shebekarka, we have 3 machlekes. According to Rav Meir, it's asur. Even with tzainin. According to Rav Shimon, it's mutter. According to Rav Yehuda, b'chamen is asur, and mitzayin is mutter. And the Gemara concluded that the discussion in our Mishnah, the term rechitza, where the Rabbanan told the Anshe Tveria, you may not use this water for rechitza since it was cooked up on Shabbos, it was cooked up on Yom Tov. However, if it would have been cooked up yesterday, the chamesh huchim b'yayim, that water can be used even on Shabbos and on Yom Tov. Apparently, says the Gemara, we're speaking about what type of use? Not bathing oneself, but merely rinsing oneself with this water. And the Mishnah follows the Shita of Reb Shimon, who says that Shtifas Kol Gufay is mutter, even with hot water, even on Shabbos, provided the water was cooked up yesterday.